My stepmother and father are going on a honeymoon with their daughters, leaving me alone, so I make sure they don't come back into my house. I am 22 years old and the legal owner of the house I grew up in. After my mother left it to me, I inherited this house from her when she passed away last year at the age of 47 due to a stroke. It was sudden, but I have now found peace with it. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old and had shared custody of me. So I spent half of the month with my dad and the other half with my mom. I must say I was closer to my mom because she understood me, and my dad, who is 50 years old, was always a bit too busy for me. I felt like I never had his full attention because work and women were more important to him. I don't think he treated me as a priority as such, but I was okay with that as long as I had my mom. A few years ago, just after I turned 18 and started college, my dad decided to move to Houston for work. So we started seeing each other less and only met around the holidays. 2 years ago he brought his girlfriend at the time, Julia, who is 38 years old, to celebrate Christmas with us. She also brought her 2 daughters, aged 18 and 16, from her previous relationship with her high school boyfriend. They had never married but had split up about 7 years before she started dating my dad. That was a surprise for us because my dad had never brought any girlfriend to family dinners. But we gave Julia and her daughters the warmest welcome we could and did our best to make them feel comfortable with us. It was a very pleasant evening, and I would say we all got along very well at that time. Even after that, whenever I talked to my dad on the phone, Julia would also greet me, and she was very sweet to me. Her daughters were a bit shy and introverted, so they mostly kept to themselves. But overall, we had a good relationship. After my mom passed away, I found out that she left me the house. Fortunately, for some reason my mom divided all her assets in her will around my 18th birthday because she always liked to plan ahead, even in morbid situations like these. Anyway, since I had just graduated, I decided to move in and find a job that wouldn't force me to move soon. I wanted to spend the next few years in my childhood home simply because it was my place of comfort. My dad wasn't very happy with my mom's decision and made sure I knew it after he found out about the will. He and Julia had been very sweet and supportive at the time of the funeral. But my dad was a bit gloomy when he realized he wasn't going to get the house back. This house was the one my parents bought together when they first got married, but my mom took it over during the divorce. It was a fair deal because he got away without paying alimony even though my mom had given up her career to stay home and raise me so my dad could focus on his work. So I think keeping the house in the settlement and letting my dad go without alimony was completely fair. She recovered afterward with some help from her parents and even made sure I never felt neglected or unimportant. She did both jobs well, and I didn't mind that my dad was upset about not getting the house back. He didn't talk about it much, but I could tell by his behavior that he wasn't happy about it. At that time, I didn't care because I was still mourning my mom. And my dad being upset about her will was the least of my worries. She left him all her wedding jewelry and all the gifts he had given her. So that should have been enough for him. He went back to Houston with Julia a few weeks after the funeral, and since then, I've been living here on my own. However, about 6 months ago, my dad told me he was now engaged to Julia and wanted to get married where his home was. So he was going to come back here during the wedding because it didn't make sense to stay in a hotel when there was a house with enough spare rooms. Her daughters were also homeschooled, so they wouldn't have any issues with schools. I agreed with him. So I agreed to let them all move into my house and stay with me before the wedding. For a couple of reasons, I was tired of living alone and I got along well with Julia, so I didn't think there was anything wrong with letting them live with me. Plus, my dad also promised to share all the bills with me while they lived here, which meant I didn't have to worry about overspending on that either. And so, they moved in with me about a month ago and have been here since then. It was nice to have them here, and I felt much less lonely than I used to when I lived alone. I thought I could get used to this. I even dreaded the day when they would all leave and go back to their normal lives, because that would mean I would have to go back to my normal life alone too. But then, 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the wedding, my dad sat me down and asked if I would be willing to let them all live here permanently. I didn't expect it at all, but he explained that he had come back here to make me feel a little more comfortable with the idea of being part of a family and living with them, since he didn't like the idea of me living alone in this house. He planned to gradually introduce me to this, and now that he thought I was getting along, he wanted to know if I would be willing to make this a permanent arrangement. I wanted to say yes right away, but his behavior when he found out he wasn't going to get the house back puzzled me a bit. As much as I would have loved to make it a permanent arrangement, I didn't think it was a good idea to do it so soon, and I didn't want to make the mistake of acting on my emotions. I knew this was the only logical solution to my overwhelming feelings of loneliness, but that didn't mean I had to let them all move in with me, and it had only been a month since they had been living here, so as much as I wanted to say yes, I ended up telling him I needed some time to think. It was a gut feeling, but I just knew for some reason that it would be best for me to give it some time and not make a hasty decision. I set aside my personal feelings and told him that I would inform him of my decision after the wedding. He seemed upset but didn't push the issue. 10 days ago they finally got married and we had a great time at the wedding. They were supposed to stay here for a couple more days after the wedding and then return home, so I was preparing to inform them of my decision, which was like this. But before I could do so, they all left for their honeymoon without even telling me. 2 days after their wedding I woke up completely alone and everyone had gone. Many of their belongings were still at my house, so I decided to make some calls, but no one answered for quite some time and I continued to worry about it. I had planned to tell them about my decision that very day, but I couldn't even get in touch with them for hours. Finally, around noon, Julia answered and casually informed me that they had all gone on their honeymoon and wouldn't be back for a week. I was stunned because I obviously expected that they would at least inform me of their plans before just leaving, even if I wasn't included. I felt offended that they didn't ask me, but I didn't want to be petty, so I started by asking why no one had informed me about any of this, and she gave me a poor excuse, saying they had forgotten to tell me, but she told me not to worry because they would be back soon. I tried to explain that wasn't the point at all, and my issue was that they simply left without a word or even a goodbye, and that was rude of them. I said I wanted to talk to my dad, but that's when her tone changed, and she said my dad was busy and didn't have time to talk to me. I still tried to stay calm and told her to let me know when he had time so that I could get in touch with him directly, and I said it politely, but she turned on me and suddenly went from being sweet to being a really biting and cruel stepmother. She told me that my dad was going to be busy for the next few days, and asked me not to bother them. She went on to say that there was no need to act so hysterically just because they had left me behind, and she felt the need to remind me that was no longer a child. My dad now had a new family, so I needed to accept that, and by the time they got home, she wanted me to stop worrying about myself and clean the house for them. Now, I don't know who she thought she was talking to, but she certainly wasn't going to talk to me like that. She hung up right after saying that, and my anger was literally through the roof. I decided not to call my dad after that and thanked the universe for not letting me accept his suggestion before I had seen this side of his new wife. There was no way in hell they were going to live with me. So, I personally packed all of their belongings as carelessly and badly as I could, stuffed them into a couple of cardboard boxes, and left them in the yard for them to find when they decided to return. I didn't care what would happen to those things, because they didn't belong to me, and they didn't belong inside a house that was mine either. After that, I went on with my life as usual and tried not to think about the betrayal I felt because of what my dad had done for no real reason. Yesterday, they finally returned from their honeymoon, and luckily, I was at work when they found all of their stuff in the yard. I had also changed the door locks in the meantime, so they couldn't get in either. My dad was extremely angry when he contacted me about it. He told me I was being a spoiled child and that I was overreacting because, to them, leaving me at home without notice wasn't something worth getting angry about, and they hadn't done anything wrong. I simply told him to take his boxes and leave, and if I saw them on my property when I got home, I would call the police. He insulted me, and then hung up, but I had to get back to work and couldn't waste my time worrying about it. When I got home after work, I noticed they had taken their things and left, and I thought that was the end of it. But the most annoying part was yet to come, because around midnight, my dad called me and told me that Julia had something to say to me. She said she was sorry for the way she had spoken to me and retracted everything she had said. She would love to have a second chance to make amends with me and didn't want to be on bad terms with me over something so insignificant. I told her to shut up and leave me alone because I didn't need her fake apologies. I'm not stupid, and could tell why she suddenly wanted to pretend to be a happy family now that I wasn't going to let them live with me. If she really regretted her actions, she wouldn't have waited so long to realize she had messed up and would have apologized right after that phone call that day, or even during their vacation, for whatever it was. I'm sure my dad doesn't regret it either, but when he realized I wasn't going to forgive them, he chose to be sentimental with me and told me I was heartless for not letting them live with me. He said he was willing to share all the bills with me if I let him move back in, but he wanted to live in this house because it reminded him of my mother. So, it would be really selfish of me to kick them out like this without thinking about the repercussions that could have, because he just wanted to come back to feel closer to my mother apparently. He even said that Julia had just had a bad day that day and didn't mean anything she said, and even his daughters missed me, so they wanted me to let them come back and start over here, but I wasn't going to accept any of that. I always knew my dad had his eye on this house since the divorce, and now that he'd seen this side of Julia, he didn't want to risk anything, so I told him they could come back home because I wasn't going to change my mind, and then, out of nowhere, my dad started crying uncontrollably on the phone and accused me of being the most selfish daughter ever because I couldn't even let him live in the house where he'd spent the happiest days of his life over a simple disagreement I had with Julia. And because they hadn't taken me with them on their honeymoon, which wasn't even the main reason. He said I was being petty and cruel and that my mom would hate this ugly side of me. Am I the bad one for not allowing my dad and his new family to move back in with me after his new wife treated me poorly, and they didn't ask me to join them on their honeymoon? Update 1. The comments on my original post weren't what I expected. Still, I don't think some of you needed to be so rude about it, but I understand the point everyone was trying to make. As for me, I stuck to my decision and didn't let my dad move back in, because honestly, he simply doesn't deserve it. He hasn't been anything but rude to me so far, and I don't need any more of that in my life. It was nice while it lasted because both he and Julia were very kind to me at first, but once I told my dad that I still needed time to think, they started showing their true colors. Probably, they ran out of patience and thought they could bully me into letting them live with me, but unfortunately, I'm not that weak. I'd rather be alone than end up spending my time with the wrong people. I shouldn't have let them come here at all, because his reaction when he found out the house deed had been transferred to me and not him should have been enough for me to realize how materialistic and selfish people can be when it comes to that. As for Julia, I'm glad she chose to senselessly argue with me and ended up ruining things for herself on large scale, because if she hadn't said that, we all would have been a happy family now, or I guess we could have been, but that's never going to happen because I'm not going to fall for their fake behavior again. I was alone. I missed my mom and all my grandparents had already passed away, so I needed a family that would be my support system, but these people are definitely not up to that job, and I'm relieved I realized that before it was too late. It's been a texting me. Since I'm not answering his calls, he thinks I should at least give them one last chance to fix things, but they don't deserve it. They wasted their only chance, and if I give them another one, I'm sure they'll waste it too, and that will affect me more than anyone else, so it doesn't make sense to take that risk. I feel bad for treating my dad this way, but there's not much I can do in a situation like this. You reap what you sow, and in his case he never bothered to much effort with me, so he has no right to complain when he realizes that I'm not going to make life decisions based on him and his feelings, but he never did that for me. Update 2. Apparently, my dad not only insists but is quite desperate to move. Guess why? Because he didn't take a break from his job as he claimed. He was fired a couple of months before his wedding and has been living off his savings until now, which were quite substantial, but now, after an extravagant wedding and a luxurious honeymoon, He finally told Julia that they couldn't afford to come back and try their luck in Houston because he couldn't pay the rent there, and Julia quit her job to be a housewife after meeting my dad so she couldn't help. Now they needed to find a place here, and my dad just assumed that I would let them live with me. Julia had no idea about any of this until he told her the truth, which is why she didn't even bother to apologize. So I was right about her not having any real remorse for her behavior. She is as fake as can be, but that's the kind of wife my dad deserves anyway. Today he contacted me and asked me to let them move in for just a couple of days, until he can find a decent job that pays enough for them to afford moving. But I told him I wasn't going to do that. They had been unpleasant to me, and I didn't need that kind of negativity around me. He's an adult. He should have known that if he didn't have a job, then he shouldn't have had such an expensive wedding followed by an equally lavish honeymoon. I understand the need to show off wealth, but that's only for people who can actually afford it, not for men with a housewife and 2 teenage stepdaughters. He was very aware of his responsibilities but chose to ignore them, and that's not my fault. And I refuse to feel guilty for putting myself first. They can manage on their own because none of this is my problem anymore. I texted him and said the same things I mentioned here. But I tried to be a bit more polite than here because I didn't want to come off as mocking him or anything like that. But he decided to take it as a mockery of what was happening, and told me that I would have to suffer for what I was doing to him. I don't know what to say to that, so I didn't respond because at this point, no matter what I say, he will find a way to make it my fault and blame me for it. So it's better not to say anything and let him wallow in his misery. It's hardly my problem now. Update 3. So, my dad decided to leave the city today, but why would he leave without letting me know how disappointing I am as a daughter? He could have left quietly, but he is who he is, and so is his wife. So they chose to make a whole spectacle out of it. The last time I talked to him was about 3 weeks ago, but we didn't speak again after that, and he didn't bother to contact me either. But today, both he and Julia texted me, saying they were thrilled to inform me that Julia's ex-boyfriend had decided to sponsor their trip back home and was even going to let them stay with him because he suddenly realized that he also needed to see his daughters. Julia had full custody of her daughters and her ex paid child support, but he was always a bit too busy to make time for his daughters. He waited long enough for Julia and my dad to sort out their situation on their own, but when he realized they were useless, he offered to clean up his own mess, which is great for his daughters, I suppose. At least some dads do step up, even if it's too late. They didn't tell me all of this, but I know this could have been the only possible explanation because they posted a picture of their daughters a few hours ago with a lucky clover and a 4-leaf clover sticker as the caption. So, I'm smart enough to figure out what might be the real story behind Julia's ex's sudden epiphany and why he's funding their trip back home. I don't understand exactly why he would sponsor all their plane tickets, but I think Julia's manipulation and stubbornness might have had something to do with it. I know for sure she has that behavior. I've seen it firsthand in the past. I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm relieved they're leaving, and this is the last I'll have to see of them. I also realized how easy I had it after reading some stories people shared here about their crazy families. You can be sure my dad is a bit too worried about his reputation to even try to hurt me in any way because he knows I won't hesitate to call the police. I have enough training to know how to defend myself, so there's no need for me to worry. And now that they're leaving, there's even less reason for me to even think about them, so hooray for me, I guess. I still feel a bit lonely sometimes, but instead of wallowing in it, I now turn to my friends because I think that's a better path forward in situations like this. I completely isolated myself after my mom passed away, and I didn't even realize how lonely I'd become until I read the comments here. It's going to take some time, but I'm going to try to make the best of my life now because I have a stable job, earn a decent income, and have my own home, which isn't something a lot of people my age have. And I'm very grateful to my mom for that. I have great friends who care about me and, honestly, what more does a person need? And if I get into trouble again, I'll just come back here, and I'm sure the wonderful people who read it will help me once more. Update 4. Today, I received an unexpected call from my father. Well, not so unexpected because he had been trying to communicate with me through messages, social media, and calls, but I didn't want to talk to him. I finally answered because I was curious about why he was so insistent and also because I wanted him to stop bothering me. It had been several months since we last talked, so I knew this was going to be interesting, to say the least. I was surprised to hear his voice after so long, but my surprise turned to disbelief when he told me that Julia had decided to get back with her ex, the same one who financed their trip back home. Apparently, things didn't work out as she expected with my father, and she decided to resume her previous relationship. My father was in a state of shock and sadness. He seemed genuinely sorry for everything that had happened and asked for a chance to reconcile and rebuild our relationship. However, after everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel indifferent. I had gone through too much stress and pain because of his and Julia's behavior, and I no longer had the desire to let them back into my life. I told him I was sorry, but I had already made my decision, and I had no intention of changing it. Even though I could hear the desperation in his voice, I stood firm in my position. After all, I couldn't ignore all the pain they had caused me. Since then, my father has continued trying to contact me, but I've chosen to block his calls and messages. I know it may be difficult for him, but I have to prioritize my own peace of mind and well-being. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.